Children, in this video we are going to continue with the second part of the chapter, New Kings and Kingdom of your history lesson, chapter 2, standard 7th. Okay, in this we are going to learn about the Chola Empire. What are we going to learn in this chapter? We are going to learn four major things in this chapter. Introduction, that means we are going to learn about the Chola Empire from Urayur to Tanjavur. We learn about the splendid temples and bronze sculptures, agriculture and irrigation, the administration of the empire. Okay. Now children, all of you can see the Kaveri river. Yes. And all of us know that wherever there is a river valley, that area is very fertile. How is it fertile? Yes, when the river overflows its banks, it deposits fertile soil all around, making the area very fertile. So in South India, in the fertile valley of the Kaveri river, a new empire was rising to power. And yes, it was the Chola Empire. Children, the Chola rulers were excellent in everything, in all spheres. They controlled most of the trade that was there in South India. They set up thriving towns which became centers of craft production. They excelled in agriculture and administration. How did they do it? How did the Cholas become one of the most powerful ruling families of India? How did they rise to power? Let us look into it. Children, before I begin the story of the Cholas, we must look at this map and have an idea of few places that are shown on this map. You can see here there is Urayur. This is an important place that you must know. This is Tanjavur. Okay, and this is Gangaikonda Cholapuram. These three places are very important, and of course this is the Kaveri river. As I told you, Kaveri river provided fertile soil and water for irrigation. So please remember these three main places: Urayur, Tanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Children, let us look into the story how the Cholas rose to power. Also, all of you see the Pallava kings. Now the Pallava kings were the ruler of Kanchipuram, and in the entire Kaveri delta was under their control. And the Pallava kings also had subordinates, as we know and read in the previous video, that the subordinates was called as Samans, and the Samans of the Pallava kings were Muttarayar, who had control of the entire Kaveri delta. Okay, and very soon, as you know, the Samans became very powerful because the kings totally dependent on them, and they provided the king with military power and money, so that they were very powerful. Very soon he overthrew the Pallava king, and the entire Kaveri delta was under Muttarayar. Okay, but in the middle of the 9th century, there was a person called Vijayalaya who belonged to the ancient family of the Cholas, hailing from Urayur, a small place, Urayur. And he had a dream and ambition to capture the entire Kaveri delta, and with this dream he overthrew and defeated Muttarayar and conquered the entire Kaveri delta, which came under his control and was called as the Chola, beginning of the Chola dynasty. And once he conquered the Kaveri delta, he built a town called Tanjavur. Okay, and a splendid town, a beautiful town he built just to show off his power and wealth. And he also built a temple in the name of Nishambhu Sudini. Okay, so this is how it started. The Chola Empire started with Vijayalaya, starting from a small town from Urayur, and that is why the introduction is given as from Urayur to Thanjavur. So from Urayur he established a big town called Thanjavur. Children, as I told you, the Chola kingdom started from a small town from Urayur, and Vijayalaya then went on to occupy some territories of the Pallava kings, and he made a splendid town called Thanjavur. And after his reign, his legacy was taken up by his son, who further expanded the Chola kingdom. Okay, and it was Raja Raja the One in 985. He was one of the most powerful Chola kings. He reorganized the administration and extended the territories of his kingdom. He expanded and took control of all the territories of the Pallava kings, the Pandya kings, the Chera territories. So almost South India was under his control. Now his son was more efficient than him. He was Rajendra Chola, or he is also called as Rajendra I. He went up to the Ganga valley, raided that, and even he raided Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. How did he do it? He developed an efficient navy, and it is said that he was one of the most daring kings who wanted to get into the sea and occupy the lands there. So he was able to conquer Southeast Asia, most parts of Southeast Asia. And it is said that during his rule it was considered as the golden period. Okay, what is golden period? It's a period when people are very happy there is security there's law and order, peace, progress is there, lots of trade and commerce is going on, and people are living very, very happily. Okay, so during his time it was called the golden rule of the Chola dynasty. It was called the golden rule. And he also established a city called Gangaikonda Cholapuram. So he was considered as one of the most powerful and efficient ruler of the Chola kingdom. Now let us look into some of the visuals and see how the territories were expanded by the Cholas from a small place from Urayur to Tanjavur, and then to occupy most of the territories in South India and even in Southeast Asia. So children, let us see the extent of the Chola Empire, starting from Vijayalaya, who reigned from Urayur, as I told you. He went to occupy and some territories of the Pallava kingdom. So you see, this was from Vijayalaya, and later on you see how his son extended the empire further. So you can see here they took over the Pandyas, the Cheras, and even Sri Lanka. Okay, you can see the extent of the empire. It's growing and growing. And then even because they had a good naval fleet, you can see they went up to Maldives and occupied that. Then we can see here, so we can say during Raja Raja I, it was from empire extended from Sri Lanka to Kalinga, which is in Orissa. Okay, but it was further expanded. We can see this is the entire territory of the Cholas by Rajendra Chola. So you can see Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, all these areas are under their control. Okay, so you can see how powerful, and this was all because Rajendra Chola had developed an efficient navy, and he was able to conquer all these places in the Southeast Asia. So you can see the extent of the Chola Empire. Okay, let's go and see here. As they had developed a navy, they were able to control trade all over in South India, and they also ventured into the sea and had trade with Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and even went up to China. So because of all this trade, that is why they were the most efficient and powerful rulers, and this kingdom was really prospering during the Chola rule. Okay. So children, this was all about the introduction from Urayur to Tanjavur, and we have seen the extent of the Chola Empire. So the three main rulers that you must remember are Vijayalaya, started from Urayur, went on to build a capital city Tanjavur. Then his legacy was carried over by his son Raja Raja I, who extended the empire, and then by Rajendra Chola. Okay. So these are the three main kings of the Chola dynasty that you must remember. Okay, so this is all about the introduction from Urayur to Tanjavur. We will go ahead with the next topic. Children, the next topic of your lesson is splendid temples and bronze sculptures. Yes, the Chola kings had reached new heights of excellence in the field of architecture and bronze sculpture. So let us look into it and see what splendid temples they built and what kind of bronze sculptures they made during that time, almost thousand of years back, which are a marvel today. They had reached the excellence in the field of architecture, and the temples are a rare marvel and engineering feat. So children, you can see here the majestic temples built by the Chola rulers. Okay, you see the first one is Brihadeshwara temple at Tanjavur, which was the capital city of the Cholas. It was built by Raja Raja the first. You can see what a majestic temple he has built. Okay, and then by Rajendra Chola, who had built a temple at a new city that he had built, Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Okay, so you can see the architectural feat, you can see the intricate designs and this entire pyramidal structure. Here you can see the designs, intricate designs here. It was made of stone, and both these temples are dedicated to the Lord Shiva. So they were actually Shivites who worshipped Shiva. Now children, these temples were not only a place of worship, they became into a town, a thriving town, and a nuclei of settlements all over. They were centers of craft production. People were making sculptures of gods and goddesses and kings. Okay, and they also, around the land, you can see there many priests started living in, garland makers. You can see all kinds of other activities started around this town. So it was not only a temple which was built with only people come here to worship, but many other activities started in and around the temples. Children were taught inside this. You can see the area here, the empty spaces where they would sit and be taught Sanskrit by the priests who were working in the temple. Then dance festivals were organized. Okay, fairs were organized, so it became a town rather than only being a town of a place of worship. So just to explain to you, as I can show for example, like we develop an IT park, and once the IT park is developed, what comes around the IT park? We see apartments, hotels, restaurants, malls, residential people all over. They come and settle in and around this area because most of the people are going to work in this IT park. So it was first only an IT park, and now you see it has become a mini town. So that is what has happened to the temple town. Now children, the kings gave huge lands for temple constructions. So once a temple was constructed, whatever was the produce from the land, whatever they produced, okay, they now, with this produce, they now hired priests, garland makers, cooks who would cook prasad for the mandirs, sweepers who would clean, musicians, dancers, all of them, they had to be paid salaries. So from the produce they would keep all these people, and then slowly this temple, as I told you, became a center and hub of activities. Okay, it became a hub of economic, social, cultural activities. Economic, now people got employment. Okay, they were earning money through the temple. Then social means everyone would come to the temple, meet each other, they would sit around with, because the gardens were made, they would have a nice time there. And also cultural festivals were organized, like dance festivals. So you see how a temple was turned into a economic hub. Okay, economic hub, social, economic and cultural hub. Children, let us see what was so marvelous about the Chola architecture. So these are some of the important features of the Brihadeshwara temple. You can see it was built by an interlock method, like puzzle technique. You can see interlocking temples. One stone is placed over another to lock it. Like you see nowadays, your flyovers are made on that pattern. So this is what this technique, now they have applied it after so many thousands of years back. This temple was built, and they have built it with the puzzle technique. Okay, some other strength features is that there were no cement, no adhesives required to stick these stones together. They were just interlocked. So you can see the marvelous architecture and the intricate sculptures all around. You can see here lovely designs put in. Okay, so these are marvels and built in those centuries. Another interesting feature is like London's big men and the Leaning Tower of Pisa are tilting with time, but Brihadeshwar temple is standing straight. There's no inclination, even after it's built after thousands of years ago. So how? What was the reason? Because the base of the temple is wide. That is why it is not tilting. So this, see the architecturally marvelous that they had really in those days had thought about it. Okay, so and it is, there's no foundation on this temple. It is built on a plain ground. No digging was done. It was built on a plain ground. Okay, and another feature that you must know is, see this huge stone put up on the top of the temple. How did they do? There were no cranes at that time. Yes, so what did they do? They built a huge ramp, 6 kilometers ramp. Took 6 years, and in the ramp, using horses, elephants, bulls, laborers together, they carried the stone and placed it on the top of the temple. So these are the architectural features, and even there's a Nandi carved out of one single stone, which is 13 feet in height. You see the architecturally marvelous, and you can't expect such kind of architecture now, that they have done it thousands of years back and still standing strong. Okay, looking to see, it has thousands of years back, it has witnessed 6 earthquakes, still nothing has happened to it. It's a true architectural marvel. Okay, apart from building temples, they were also very good at building bronze sculptures. Now one of the famous bronze sculptures is a Nataraj statue. Okay, so you can see they used to build nice articraft, and this is Lord Shiva in a dancing posture. Lovely architecture, which it is unimaginable of people to have such kind of precision and detailing of building, making such sculptures. Okay, so you see the Cholas not only excelled in their administration, they were powerful kings, but they built splendid temples and sculptures. Now children, the Cholas excelled in agriculture and also innovated some new irrigation techniques. Now let us see what did they do and how did they develop agriculture. So first thing that they did was to have large scale cultivation. Earlier the farmers had only small pieces of land, but they decided these small pieces of land do not produce much, they must have large cultivation. So by the 5th and the 6th century, large cultivation fully developed. And how did they do it? First, cleared up all the forests, cut down all the trees, leveled the land, and then they started the agriculture. And one of the natural things that they had was the river Kaveri, which provided them with plenty of water. And most of the time, you see, when this river Kaveri would overflow, what would it do when the river was overflow? It would leave on the sides a fertile soil, so which was very good for growing crops. But sometimes when the river Kaveri had floods in the river Kaveri and it overflowed, and then what would happen to the crops? They would all get destroyed. Now, to control all of this, what are the things that the Cholas did? Let's look into it. Now the Kaveri water provided ample water to the fields, and when it used to deposit fertile soil, so they used to grow crops like rice, and at times they used to grow more than one crop a year, maybe 2 crops in a year. So people were actually now becoming rich, the farmers were becoming rich. But at times when the river was in flood, or where there would be heavy rainfall, it would destroy all the crops. Now the Cholas, you see how they worked upon it. They would gather together and think of ways to solve the problem. So they came up with a wonderful idea at that time to build an embankment, isn't it? To raise a big wall around the field. The level of the field was raised so that the water would not get into the field when the river was in floods. And this embankment built with earth and stones, and at times they would keep on improving these embankments. So they did this to prevent flooding of the river water. And during times of then there is no rainfall, what did they do? How will they water their fields? So they came up with wonderful irrigation techniques also. They came up with canal system. Now what is a canal? Canal is where it is connected, water is connected to the river. Okay, it's one of the beautiful invention. The water is carried from the river to the fields. Okay, so this is how they would irrigate the fields. You can see here how it is connected to the river, and small channels were made which carries water to their fields. Okay, so this was a beautiful invention made by the Cholas. Now the Cholas not only depended on the Kaveri river, they also made wells and tanks where they stored water which they could use in times when there was a drought. So you can see how well they were planned, and one of the major engineering engineering marvel that they have made was the sluice gate, which was invented in the 9th century. Now what is this sluice gate? It is made of wood or metal, and it is used to control water level and flow of water into rivers and canals. Also it regulates outflow of water from a tank into the channels that irrigate the field. Isn't it a marvelous invention by the Cholas? Yes, you see these agriculture and irrigation received great support by the Chola rulers, and so you can see the agriculture developed was the highest level of agriculture, and that's how they became so prosperous and one of the powerful kingdoms in South India. So Cholas really have contributed a lot towards development of irrigation and agriculture, and they also respected the farmers. Some of the richest farmers were given high titles in the government. They were respected, and sometimes they were asked to look into the law and order and administration of the village also. So we see, children, how agriculture and irrigation developed to its peak during the Chola kingdom, and large scale cultivation carried on. People were happy, peasants were happy because they got support from the government, and also they, whatever they built, the tanks, the wells, the dams, the sluice gates, was made of high quality material so that there would be less maintenance. But it was not that they did not plan for maintenance. A committee was formed which would go around checking and help the farmers in maintaining all these canals so that there was a regular flow of water and the farmers easily could irrigate his field and grow his crops. All kinds of support were given to the farmers. So this is all about agriculture and irrigation of the Cholas. Children, moving ahead to the next topic of your lesson, the administration of the Cholas. And as you know, the Cholas had an effective and foolproof administration in the country. Now let us see how they administered the entire empire. Okay, so first it was the kingdom which was controlled by the king and his council of ministers. Then the entire kingdom was divided into states which were called as mandalams. The mandalams were further divided into cities which were called as kotams, and then into districts which were called as nadus, and nadus were further divided into villages, okay, which were called as ur. So this was the pattern or hierarchy of administration of the Cholas. So children, the entire kingdom of the Cholas was divided into 9 mandalams. Okay, you can see here 9 mandalams. These mandalams were further divided into kotams and further divided into nadus and villages. So that's how the administration was done by the Cholas. Let's look into the village administration done by the Cholas. Now, as the spread of agriculture and irrigation began when the Chola rule, peasants became prosperous because now they could grow enough crops for themselves, feed themselves, and they were very happy. So this led to the settlement of villages, and these villages were called as Ur. So children, as I told you, a village of the Chola was called as an Ur. So one village is a Ur. When they are all clubbed together, or a cluster of villages was called a Nadu. Now the rich peasants of the Urs who belonged to the Velila caste, they were appointed by the king to look after the entire Nadu. Okay, and what was their work? Their work was to collect taxes and look into the law and order of the village. Okay, so these are the Velila caste who had the work to look after all the small villages which were clubbed together and called as a Nadu. So children, the main work of this rich landlords and peasants was to dispense justice and collect taxes, and they would directly report to the king. So this was how the village was looked after by this Velela caste, who were rich peasants. Now these rich landlords of the Velela caste were given titles by the kings as a mark of respect, and they were called as Muvin, the Velam, or Aryar, or a chief. Okay, they were respected by the kings, and sometimes they were given an authority to control the entire village. And you see, the entire cluster of village they controlled, which was called as the Nadu. Okay, then we go ahead and we see that there were many other agricultural lands which are distributed to many other people. Like the leaders distributed land to the Brahmins, it was called as Brahmadaya. Velangvagi, which was given to lands to the non-Brahmins. Then there were lands given to Shala Bhoga, and means given for the establishment of schools. They also distributed land or Devdana, that means land gifted to the temples, and Palichantanam donated to the Jain institutions. So these Chola kings distributed lands in many other ways, and we look into the land gifted to the Brahmins as Brahmadaya. What did these Brahmins do about it? Okay. So children, as I mentioned, that the Brahmins received land grants from the rulers as Brahmadaya. Okay, it's a tax-free land which they got as gifts from the rulers. Now, as a result, a number of Brahmins started settling near the Kaveri river, and each kind of a land that was given to the Brahmins where they settled was called an Aghara. Like we have the Ur, here it is called as the Aghara. So you can see, children, how the Brahmins started settling near the Kaveri river. You can see the Kaveri river. Why did they settle near the Kaveri river? Obviously because it was a fertile land, and each settlement of the Brahmins, which was called as Aghara, came now to be settled near the Kaveri river. So it was a cluster of Agharas. Okay, and these clusters of Agharas formed a Nadu. So we have two Nadus, one which was formed by the peasants, that is the Urs. Cluster of Urs was also called as a Nadu, and clusters of Aghara was also called as a Nadu. Okay, so there are two types of Nadus, one made by the peasants and one made by the Brahmins. Now only difference is that they owned their land, but this land was gifted, the Brahmin land was gifted by the rulers as gifts. Okay. Now each Brahmadaya or Aghara was looked after by an assembly called Sabha. Okay, and who were the members of the Sabha? They were experienced and learned Brahmins, okay, who looked after the working of the entire Aghara or Brahmadaya. And the decisions taken by these Sabhas were inscribed on the walls of the temples, on the stone walls of the temples. So it was like a record kept. So whatever decisions were taken by Aghara were inscribed on the stone walls of the temples. Now these Sabhas organized separate committees who looked into various works of the village. Like they were appointed, some were appointed to look into the irrigation work of the village, some looking after the temple, some looking after the garden. This is how the Aghara was maintained by the Sabha. Okay, so and now let us see who were the members and how were they chosen, to who would be working for all these departments. It was an interesting way how they chose the members of the various committees of the Sabha. So let us look into the interesting way how the members of the committees of the Sabha were chosen. Okay, so you see here there is an earthen pot and this boy is holding a leaf. So the eligible members, whoever were the eligible members, their names were written on different palm leaves. Okay, and then once the names were written, then these palm leaves were put into an earthen pot. Okay, and all the Sabha members were present, and a young boy of the village, the smallest boy of the village, was called, and he was asked to now put in his hand into the earthen pot and take out any one of the leaves from the pot. Okay, one by one. So each member for one committee every committee, one by one, the members were chosen. It was like a lottery system, okay, lucky dip system. So this is how the members of various committees. Now, which were the various committees? The irrigation works, somebody would look after the temple, somebody would look after the garden. So members were chosen accordingly. But the names, they first noted down all the names who would work for these committees. Then those names were written on a palm leaf and put into the earthen pot. Okay, so this is how they were selected for the various committees in the Sabha. As I mentioned earlier, that the decisions of the Sabha were inscribed on stone walls of the temples. Now, the archaeologists have found such an inscription in Uttar Mayur in Tamil Nadu, where they have found all the decisions made by the Sabha written down on the stone walls of the temples. So, this gives us a detailed idea of how the Sabhas had organized themselves. Children, there was another group formed by the traders in the villages. They were called as Nagarams, and they formed their own association. So we see in the village administration, we've seen Ur, Sabha and Nagarams. So you see, children, this is how there were two types of nadus. One which was formed by the Ur, that means villages in which the farmers lived or the peasants lived, and this nadu which was formed where the Brahmins lived. Now the Ur was looked after, each Ur was looked after by this rich landlords who looked into the law and order and collected taxes and directly reported to the king. Similarly, they were land grants given by the kings to the Brahmins, and each Brahmadaya or land grant was called as a agara, and they all formed, and each agara was looked after by a sabha, and as I told you, the decisions were recorded on the temples, and committees were formed which worked for the irrigation, for the temples and for the gardens. So this is how we see the village administration was done in the village. So you see, children, in the village we have the Ur, the Sabha. Ur is for the peasants, the Sabha was for the Brahmins, and there was another group formed of traders who looked into their own problems. The traders formed their own associations which were called as Nagarams. So the village administration had three parts: the Ur, the Sabha and the Nagarams. Now the Chola rulers built a network of roads, okay, which were useful for trade and commerce. They also had high regards for scholars, saints and poets. And then these scholars actually worked of the Chola rule, these scholars in the Chola rule worked for excellence in every sphere of literature and culture. So children, you see, in history we find lot of inscriptions which talks about the kings and rulers and how they administered their country. But the Cholas also have a work written in Tamil called Pariya Puranam, which talks about how the ordinary men and women lived during the Chola rule. What was their occupation, what clothes they wore, what did they eat, how did they make their houses. Every detailed account is given about the ordinary men and women. So you see, children, the Chola kingdom was a kingdom of profit, of comfort, of protection and prosperity, and they were very innovative and had unique ideas when it came to agriculture, irrigation and administration. So this Chola kingdom empire is one of the finest chapters that we find in South Indian history. With this, we come to the end of this chapter, New Kings and Kingdoms. Please, if you like it, do subscribe and press the like button. Thank you.